Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Oregon Cannabis Association event, Marketing from a Social Justice Lens. I am so excited about the panel that have come to speak with us tonight and to really dig into this conversation about how we can authentically lift up and support Black voices through our marketing efforts, which is of a particular responsibility for us as companies. Our panelists are joining now. This is a new platform for us, which I am so thankful to use. We were able to use it real quick for a networking event last month. But this remote platform has been brought to us by the firm of Miller, Nash, Graham, and Dunn. And we are so thankful for them for supporting the OCA's efforts, our social justice efforts, and for allowing us to come together and connect on a space. After the event, they're going to leave it open for half an hour. So if you want to hop down to the little table networking and connect with folks, you're welcome to do that down there. Two other real quick sponsor shout outs. I need to thank and want to thank both Weed Maps and Barbary, who made it possible for us to put this together. Thank you both for supporting our efforts here. And one more real quick. I'm really bad about saying one more and then giving you five. But proceeds from tonight's event went to the Cannabis Equity PAC. The Cannabis Equity PAC supports the passage of the Oregon Cannabis Equity Act, which will focus cannabis tax dollars and other relevant funds into repairing the damages done by Black and Brown communities and providing business opportunities and support. The act also enacts free automatic expungement of eligible cannabis crimes for everyone, which eliminates the hurdles that kept nearly 20,000 plus Oregonians from expunging their cannabis records. That's right, I said 20,000 plus still have cannabis crimes in their records in Oregon, and that act will help get rid of that, clear their records. And if you want to learn more about that, I'm going to try to paste that in a chat right now. We'll see if that happens. Okay, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to jump in. At some point, oh wait, oh look, I did it. There we go. Click on the website, find out more about cannabis equity in Oregon. Now I need to turn it over to our fantastic panel. I'm going to do a real brief description, then let you all say hello yourselves. I'm not going to make you sit here while I read your whole bios. So go ahead and give a quick wave. I'll do this in alphabetical order. Bianca Reed, Vice President of Client Development at Rain the Growth Agency. Thank you so much for being with us, Bianca.
Thank you.
And Brandon Pierce, Creative Director at Loud and VP of Marketing at Hulu. Hey, Brandon, thanks for joining us.
Hey, guys. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
And Duchesne Ramsey, Senior Brand Strategist at Square, with more than 12 years of industry experience in making big ideas, smart strategies, and large consumer events. Hey, Duchesne.
How y'all doing?
Now, I just kept reading your bio there. I was on a roll. I had to go for it.
All right. Sounds great.
Well, thank you all for joining us. I have some questions that our social justice committee helped me put together, and shout out to them for the work that they do for cannabis equity in Oregon. So I have these questions here, but I don't want to tie those down, and I'm going to try not to talk too much because I'm really excited to hear y'all discuss and dig deep into these issues. And so no format here. I'm not going to call you out name by name and have you answer each question. Just jump in as you feel called to do so, or sit back as you would like to do so. So I will just jump off with the first one just to get us going. And I think this has happened, I'm just going to jump into it. So with this issue in this space, silence isn't golden. In the cannabis space, brands have an opportunity, or more importantly, a responsibility to speak out on systemic racism and racial injustice. But often companies stay silent because they're not sure where to start, or they're afraid of misstepping, which prevents them from making a public statement. Just to kick it out right off, what would you say to these folks?
I think, so my take on it first is you don't always have to make a public statement. I would much rather see that evident in the work you're doing. So are you hiring Black talent? Are you focusing on the Black consumer as a true whole audience and not a partial human that you're kind of like focusing on trauma porn with, in kind of that environment of Black pain? So I think that would be the first step, is don't feel like am less impressed by massive statements and more focused on we did real work within our organization to make sure we have a diverse and inclusive organization. And then we are conscious of the impact that we're having on the communities that we benefit from as well. So I think more internal work and less press releases and statements for me.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that there's, brands compete with each other. And I think that part of that creates this expectation that when culture or people are calling out certain brands for inaction or pointing things out, that what that means is that that's a call to arms for all brands, and that's not necessarily the case. I think it's just pointing something out, and it's the action there, sort of like figure out what that means for your organization. So to Bianca's point, oftentimes that just means how are you going to fix, what you're feeling weird about? Like, what are you going to do about it? For the brands that do feel like there's an external something to be done, I think that oftentimes the other part is that the fix isn't by the brand by itself. I think partnership and really like figuring out, where it makes sense, how it makes sense to partner with organizations, people, personalities, et cetera, to like take those steps forward is often the better look. Because it's sort of math, right? Like if you already are sort of like lacking in a space and you don't have the tools, then to try to take all the steps by yourself is already probably going to be a misstep.
I agree. I think also the danger is, people thinking that there is a quick fix. I think a prime example is obviously George Floyd last year for whatever reason, white people in brands realized that racism exists. It's like, which is, I laugh about it because, my work that I do at Hulu, all of a sudden it was like, I'm proofreading like all company emails for people and making sure there's no triggering language in there. And there was triggering. I was shocked when I was like, oh, I guess I'll proofread it, whatever. And then see it. And, hearing people that were pretty senior saying things like, I never realized racism existed until George. I'm like, there's a problem right there. It's just like, it's such a baseline awareness that hasn't happened, that has to happen outside of the workplace before it can happen in the workplace. I think you have to kind of live certain truths in order to bring those, to your work. So I think there's just like, there's no quick fix to it. And I think trying to avoid the Band-Aid and going for like the surgery, that'll last. Hopefully, the length of the hurt and the harm that's happened, like that's kind of a good starting point.
And I think that connects to Bianca's point. Hopefully what happens is that the work starts becoming evident, or the proof starts becoming evident in the work. And even if the situation happens that maybe the brand feels like, oh, there's still a magnifying glass and there are people saying that we're not doing anything, and hopefully what happens is that the work that is like resulting starts to resolve some of that. Because there really isn't going to be a quick fix if you sort of make a statement and the statement comes without all of the other stuff that needs to happen, and it comes without, longevity. We're still sitting inside the context of society. And so we can expect that there will be another situation. And if at that time you still haven't shown up, the magnifying glass just gets hotter. It just gets to be like a bigger one because now you've said something and you haven't invested all the other internal speculation to make a long-term change.
Yeah. I realize too, when people ask that, they want a tangible answer. But I want to do something. And so I would also consider, if you have a platform that you can amplify another voice, so locally to Portland, is there a Black-owned restaurant that you can partner with to do an event or do a night that helps them build traffic, that you're connecting with your consumer in a way that's real and authentic? I think that does so much more than like your Black Square on Instagram or any of those efforts. Like, how are you partnering locally? And yes, it will benefit your brand in the long run. And there will probably be people there who will buy your product, but what you have done is given someone else a platform to amplify their voice. in a way that feels more authentic than the statement that you want us to read and kind of react to as well.
Yeah, that's great. I think you just like hit right to it. There's no easy answer, right? This is a long road. How would you how do you recommend that folks, I think there's a fear sometimes of that, like authentically supporting and amplifying other voices versus like self-promotion. And is that a genuine fear? And if so, like how do you navigate or self-check on that?
Man,
Hard.
that's a tough one. It's especially when you also work for a brand. It's tough.
Yeah. I do think there's ways to do it where we're all business. Like we understand how business works. We do. I think there's also this understanding that somehow Black consumers don't understand business. So like, I'm doing this for the right reasons. Like we understand commerce. We have $1.3 trillion in spending power. We understand commerce. But I think if you go to them in a true partnership and say, how do I elevate your brand? How do I do something to support? I'm authentically trying to support. And don't put the work on them to come up with everything. But I would say, I want to support. Is there a way I can do it? I think, and I'm going to give Barbie a shout out here, but I think the way they've always run their social media to me feels authentic. And the first time I met them, I had no idea who was behind the brand because everything they put out felt so inclusive and so authentic. So as soon as I met them, I'm like, oh, okay, well, this is what I'm putting behind it. But it didn't feel off-putting to me where they were heavily marketing to one audience or ignoring another. So then if they make a statement about something, it felt authentic all along. So I think you also have to look at what have you been doing historically? Is this coming out of the blue for you? Have you never done anything before and suddenly you're jumping up? But I also think it's easier when you have great talent that you hired because they can authentically support some of that. So I know that's, it's a longer game to make sure your talent is diverse as well. But I do think that's key in being authentic. If you have all Caucasian staff and then you're like, we're going to do this great thing. I'm like, you need to work in your own backyard for a minute. Like do some examination there before you jump out to support every community.
I feel like for every answer, I'm going to just like deposit nothing about us without this because it just like makes sense. It just works. Because this is another case where I think partnership is a big benefit, right? Like, yes, like Black people, Black community, like they completely understand. We understand like commerce and like, what marketing is and how it works and like why it functions and all those things. And quite frankly, like enjoy a lot of it and, participate in it. And it's really a matter of if that feels like it's coming from a completely like capitalistic space or if it feels like there's work that's been done that actually creates an authentic connection. And I think the other part about it too is like, if the brand kind of like runs to the finish line and goes from like no conversation and no activity and no representation and like none of those things, and then February 1st, all of a sudden like all the casting looks a certain way and the initiatives all of a sudden start to be in vogue with the sort of like social conversation, that's the point when it's like the self-promotion feels like it takes more weight than trying to like reach across the aisle and give people some shine. I think Kim got kicked off. Maybe
she jumped off. She had all the questions too.
I'm gonna moderate, I guess.
I kicked myself off.
The Lakers this year. How we like
I was like, no one wants to see me nodding along.
You can keep asking. It's okay.
But
stay on.
Since I'm back, I think this comes obviously like this comes up a lot. Like we're the Oregon Cannabis Association. As cannabis businesses, I think there's a long racist history of legalization in cannabis. To doing this work, which starts internally, there's no quick fix for it. Like, what do you have to say about our particular, as business owners or employees or enthusiasts, our particular responsibility in the cannabis space to this kind of work?
I can speak. I'm definitely probably like a novice, I would say, to the Oregon cannabis space. Like, my cousin Jesse Horton founded Loud, and you know, I've come in the last couple of years as a, you know, creative voice, but I've definitely learned a lot just, you know, working with him, especially on his, you know, initiatives to get more minorities into the cannabis space. And even as we're looking at, you know, marketing materials and captions for like our social posts, like everything we do is definitely like very intentional. And we did a lot of work on the upfront, just kind of establishing like what our brand voice is and what our POV is and like what we stand for. And also, you know, I lived in Oregon. I lived in Portland for 6 years and worked at Wyden Kennedy. And, you know, I had my own experience in Oregon as a Black dude. And so I was able to also tap into those experiences coupled with his, and just kind of like, you know, how can we put the stuff out there that we would want to see and that we feel like is representative of our culture, um, while also creating something that's aspirational to the consumer. So what we do at Loud is we have this really nice cross section of nature and urban. And that's something that's based on, I'd never gone camping. You know, I've barely been in the woods before I moved to Portland. Next thing you know, I'm on the river and going waterfall hunting and shit. And, you know, wearing like Pendleton, and like just all of a sudden like unlocked this whole different side of me that was like exciting and new, and also was like healthy and promoted like mental health, physical health, wellness, awareness. Like it just unlocked this whole other side. So I feel like through the cannabis industry, it's an easy barrier to entry because we know, you know, Black people enjoy, you know, fine cannabis products. So it's an easy barrier to entry to have a larger cultural conversation. And so the more that we can, you know, have brands that are truthful as opposed to like creating false narratives or false personas, as long as it's representative of somebody from the culture, then someone's going to gravitate toward it. And I think it just leads to, you know, good things in that.
I agree. I really agree on the wellness point. I think often in the wellness space, Black people are ignored, and in the self-care space, we love wellness. We want self-care. I think if you think about kind of the trauma of the experience of kind of going through this world being Black, self-care is very important to us. And so I think there's times where you can market to that offering, to say, you know, the wellness piece, fitness. You see Peloton doing it. Peloton has shifted a lot of their marketing to acknowledging the Black consumer because that's where they're seeing growth right now. And I think there's a piece of that where when you're encouraging something that's wellness, there's ways to do it where you aren't you aren't going towards a stereotype. So I read an article and they were talking about how with Black consumers in a lot of cases, you were marketing to a stereotype. But I can't tell you how many other working moms I know who are all cannabis users who never see marketing reflective of being a working mom. And it's almost like you're scared to fully market to an authentic kind of the authentic Black culture. And so I think there's space to do that. You know, I grew up in Portland, so I've been hiking and biking and camping my whole life. Somewhat, very reluctantly, I've been dragged on many camping trips. But I agree with that point where it's, I think you do not have to completely focus on the historic pain of this industry because every industry in America has that same historic pain. So I'm not saying that you do not need to have equity programs. I'm not saying you need to be aware, like consider all those factors. But I also think there's beauty in the history of cannabis. There's a lot that happened during the jazz age that Black people were we were at the forefront of that. And so there's things you can do around that acknowledges some of the positive of history that happened there too. And the war on drugs took all that away, but that is beyond what I think a single organ brand can take on. So I do think there's ways you can ancillarily kind of move forward in certain aspects while still respecting the heritage and the pain of things that happen through equity programs and other pieces.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I'm going to try to not go on too many tangents here. First of all, I grew up in New York and then I moved to Oregon also and found myself like floating down random rivers. And was like, what is happening?
Who did this?
Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
Like, huh? It was great. Um, so I am a like giant brand nerd, and so one of the things that I think is really exciting about what's happening with cannabis in general is all of the repositioning and reframing that's happened. You know, growing up in New York, cannabis was always something that was like gritty and shady, and you know there was like a sense of like needing to hide it, and a sense of it being, you know, kind of like illegal. And when I moved to Portland and just like went to a bright ass store to go buy, it was, you know, even as an adult, it still didn't feel right. It didn't sit right with me because I just wasn't used to that thing. And I think that that reframing and the sort of high level rebranding is really powerful. And so I really do agree with the result of it and the sort of like way of executing that responsibility, which I want to get to that word in a second, doesn't necessarily need to be kind of like retroactive, and doesn't need to necessarily call on, you know, history. There's a lot of power in just like really harnessing that like inclusivity in the way that things are being reframed right now. So, you know, whether it is about something that's like, you know, these are products that are made to help you feel better about yourself, and showcasing Black people like in the array of people that's being, you know, that are being like represented in this, like, you know, the benefit of the product, that's a huge thing. And there's a lot of power in that. The flip side of that, though, is there needs to be some sort of voice, though, that does have an anchor, because if the rebranding is really successful, then what happens is that 20 years down the line, we have a cannabis industry that maybe feels like the like champagne industry, and it's fun and it's jovial and it's all these things, and I'm just making that up, but it's like all these things, and there's kind of like a new perception of it, let's call it globally, and that perception now lacks all of the stuff that has happened, all the people that have suffered to get it to that point. And so I think that there does need to be some sort of an anchor there that remembers that and finds ways to bring that conversation back in. And the tricky thing about the word responsibility as far as brands goes is that in some ways, like, you don't have to take responsibility. You need to be authentic. And so if you're a brand that, if you are a cannabis brand that doesn't want to take part in that history, then that's that, right? I hope that that's not the truth. But the brands that do want to like honor that, I think that it's about finding the specific moments to, whether it's through like equity programs or partnerships, or whether it's through sponsoring, you know, expungement programs, things like that, to like actually like get the work done. I think that those things are really powerful and can provide that anchor, so that the sort of history of it and the you know, the foundation that's helping us to get to the point of this, like, you know, better version, you know, like all those things actually made it possible. But brand responsibility is always tricky, because that's, I think, what makes brands feel like they have to be in the space and they have to be there, and they don't necessarily do all the work to get there. So the hope is that people feel that, and the sort of inclusivity is natural and part of everything. But, you know, it shouldn't be something that is like social responsibility becomes a check mark, just like sustainability becomes a check mark. It's like all these things that are like, make sure we have a program for all of these things because this is what modern brands do. Like, that's not what it's about. It's really about finding out, like, who are we as a brand? Let's make sure we're considering this because this is a part of our industry. What part of this history feels like something that we can actually talk about? What are we ready to like action against? What are we ready to include in our philosophies and everything from our pricing to our packaging? And then once you have that, then you move forward.
Again, you can't just leap to the finish line, right? That's the overall message that we're getting there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that idea though, is of the opportunity to like not reframe, but to redirect the conversation and redirect how, and using our platform as business owners and people with social media accounts and advertising budgets to redirect that space. while still anchoring it.
Yeah, and let me tell you, I'm back in New York now, and still today, when I tell people about the world and the repositioning that's happening in the industry, people in New York are like, nah, like still do not believe it, because it's just like, I don't know, it's like too fresh. So good for y'all. It's really exciting work. I think it's good.
I know that's the first thing whenever we have people in town, they want to see and experience it. And so we're taking them on, the first Black-owned dispensary, and I'm forgetting the name, but this is Northeast Portland. I'm taking them there just to experience that and see the tide of music that's in that beautiful building and kind of experience. So it's really cool to have this culture that you can share, even in Portland, share the cannabis culture here. And so you do have an opportunity to be at the forefront of it because you're one of the first states that's fully legalized. So to be at the forefront and kind of set the trends is a cool position to be in.
Yeah.
But I do understand the weight and responsibility that comes with that. So a lot of the brands are like, I don't want to do this. I want to be really careful. And so I understand that responsibility in that way.
Can you dig in a little bit deeper? Oh, I think, is it Green Muse, formerly Green Hop?
Yes, Green Muse. I'm sorry.
No,
I'm
no,
like,
no.
I'm gonna remember it's a green yellow building, and it's gonna. Yes. You
No
think
worries.
how I got it by the green and yellow building. Yeah.
Go check them out, Green Muse.
Yeah.
I'd like to dig in a little bit deeper, if you don't mind. And I think, again, and I know a lot of folks like want the quick answer, but ways that they can make sure that they're authentically like living these values as a company and not just as a marketing brand. Can you give me some specifics or some things that you'd like to see companies like? Maybe we have a lot of like small business owners, as part of the association. They have like kind of stressed out, like we all are, wearing 10 hats. But what are those first steps where they can start to say, like, where am I at personally, and then where is my company at, and what can I do to start moving forward?
Go ahead. No, go for it. I'll follow you.
My answer will probably be a little bit shorter, because I'm thinking of it as a strategist. Like, I wouldn't say that I'm like incredibly versed in the cannabis industry. And so if I were working for one of y'all, and the task was to kind of like figure out like what the strategy is going to be, the first thing that I would do is really dig into like the history and like learn about things. Like I had a random conversation with somebody back in Portland actually, and they were talking about some kind of underground like psychedelic like 1920s culture that existed in America. And it's like things like that, like that's like pretty far. I can push into the extreme there, but I think like the first thing is really like understanding the history, because there's the industry and sort of like where things are, and we can think back to like 20 years, but like where does the actual industry stretch back to from a history standpoint? And that would be the first place that I go to make sure that you as an individual actually understand all of those things. And it's a quick jump to go from there to understanding like laws and what happened with laws, and you can go down the rabbit hole. So that would be my very first thing, is like you as an individual, no matter where you are in the company, do your own research to like really understand what this industry is all about.
Yeah. You want to go, Bianca?
No, go for it.
Okay. I would say one big one is supplier diversity. A lot of times, even like minority-owned businesses, the first instinct is to just go to where everybody else goes. Like go to where the mainstays go to get their ingredients, whatever it is you need. But looking at other like suppliers that are trying to do the same thing you're doing in the flower space or whatever space you're in, and just diversify your resources and your network, and just kind of like empower them, and then it becomes this sort of cyclical symbiotic relationship rooted in diversity. So I'd say supplier diversity is a huge one. Obviously supporting other companies, like not looking at it necessarily as competition, looking at it as like if we all eat, we all win. Not being adverse to collabos. I think that's probably a huge thing we can learn from other industries. Like when there are people that are, you know, would seemingly be competitors, when they come together just to create something dope, like in turn, at the end of the day, like you get that collaboration, but then you've gained a newfound respect for each individual company that was willing to work together and come to the table. And then lastly would be obviously supporting organizations like New Leaf Project, you know, making it not feel like a corn maze to get into the industry, like giving people the blueprint, and, you know, having founders be super vocal about their paths. So I don't think there is a, you know, a path that is mimicked in anyone's experience. Everyone has a different way that they were introduced into the industry. But at the end of the day, we're all here. So I think it's important to share our origin stories, about how we might have been in an adjacent space and then it just led us here, or we were in a completely random space and had a conversation, and all of a sudden, you know, you're in the cannabis industry. I think there's so many origin stories out there as well that the more we can put those out there, you know, I personally, like, in anything I'm curious about, I just nerd out on YouTube interviews about the subject. Like
University.
Yeah, I mean, that there's no, it's literally like anything you want to learn or curious about, spend a day on YouTube. It sounds, I mean, it sounds very stonery probably, but you can blaze and learn at the same time. So you know, I think that those are just some like simple things that come to mind.
I would agree. I think education, Portland has this tendency and to want to be apologetic and want to apologize for things that happen. And I think stopping yourself from doing the apologies. So educate yourself. There's some great documentaries on Netflix about this space and the history that you can get into, echoing what Brandon said about YouTube. There's also great books. So educate yourself. I think you're better to be in a place where you're educated and you're not kind of leaning on a Black person or person of color to kind of educate you about the space. The other thing I really encourage is mentorship and internships. That allows young, like for instance, in the marketing industry, I know so many amazing Black professionals who know nothing about this industry because you just had a limited scope of career options at some point. So in that industry, I'm like, how can I mentor? How can I be a resource? I think the same thing needs to happen in the cannabis industry because there's equity, but there's also a lot of us don't even know how to start. So how are you also being a mentor in that space? There's kids in college who are creatives and going to be future leaders. How do you bring them into the space? Maybe you have beautiful limited packaging that highlights Black artists. There's a lot you can do within your kind of scope to make sure that that's incorporated in your brand. And I agree with supplier diversity. I think when you go into a dispensary, there's things outside of cannabis specifically that if you're like, oh, I can't find a brand, this portion of I can't find this Black-owned product. There's something ancillary to that I'm sure there's someone Black who has created. So how do you make your space welcoming? And Portland will purchase it. I can't tell, like Portland is good about that. When you have an area and you're like, these are Black-owned, Portland will dive in and support. So I think making that available to your consumers as well and that education piece. And then I agree with what they both said because it's true that partnership and being authentic in that partnership as well, I think is key.
Yeah, one more piece that I would add is if your brand are able to, if in the building of a brand or building of a thing that you're doing, you're able to do focus groups or you're able to like get feedback from people, just making sure that that group is also diverse and inclusive and thinking about, you know, you should have members of like who you want your audience to be as like part of that focus group as well. Because a lot of that feedback will give you the initial cues and the initial things to watch out for and like places to build and figure things out. So if you are able to, or even if you're able to have like, you know, a bit of an advisory board, like people who will like give you like honest, like raw feedback in like places where like you might be like having a blind spot. I think that could also be really helpful, just like as an ongoing thing.
Great. Yeah, I think it's, and again, it's just like being more like as thoughtful and again, as authentic as you can, right? And I think we forget about that sometimes as business owners, but like we have a lot of capital that we're putting out there to even just create our products, right? And promote our products. Who are we paying to do those things, and where are we spending that money?
It's a lot. And, I think that can't take that too lightly. Like just getting a business up and running, just the nuts and bolts is one thing in and of itself. And these conversations are about the brand portion of it. And that's a full-time job. That's like a whole ass, team doing that kind of stuff. So I guess that just goes to echo more of like it takes time thing. And the time that it's taking is opportunities to like individually learn. I'm going to keep hammering on that too, because I think oftentimes what happens is that if the company has the history, I think maybe sometimes people feel like they don't need to do their own kind of like exploration. And I think what we're saying is like every individual needs to do their own learning. Not if the company is presenting you like, here's the history and like what we're connected to, like that, it counts, but like not that much. You know what I mean? Like you in and of yourself have to have your own compass as well.
Yeah, for sure. I do want to give folks a chance. There is a Q&A. You can either put questions in the chat if you have questions for the panel, or there's a Q&A button and you can type them in there. One question that has come up a little bit, and again, I don't want to like, now I'm like, maybe I don't even want to ask this, because again, it's like, we don't want to even go too hard on people, right? And this question has come up where, and I think it's that like culture thing where people are like, maybe I should just get to the point. So here, so this question has come up from folks where it's like give backs, right? And what is the point? That became a popular thing, especially over the summer. So we're giving back 20% of these proceeds go to this charity or whatever it is. And how do you feel about that as a way to promote other companies and promote nonprofits, promote people doing good work in this space, and versus, is it self-promotion as well? Is that okay? Can we do both if we're authentically showing up? How do you feel about that?
I work with a lot of founders, and the only thing, I'm all about give back, but I think sometimes you need your business to be successful too. So sometimes I want to say, okay, is your give back allowing you to continue to generate revenue that will, keep people employed? So I saw, like, I've seen some behind the numbers stuff, and it kind of concerned me because I was like, but how are you going to keep this company running? So I think with give backs, think about organizations that there's some Black veteran organizations that, will take, that I've heard will take donations of CBD and other products. And so there's other ways to do in-kind donations. So I think some of that 20% of proceeds, but I think the other thing is scholarships or things that also tangibly, like, what are you giving the money to? You're just giving money to things like, what are you tangibly doing? I think the tech industry does that a lot, where they're like, we're going to give money to this organization, but nothing, again, to go back, nothing, they don't have, it's not reflected in who they hire. It's not reflected in their suppliers. It's not reflected in those pieces, but they do this big statement that, oh, we just gave $20 million to this organization. Money is great, but if you look at some of the small cannabis businesses here, they genuinely don't have that to give. So how do you do other things that support volunteering in organizations? Like I said, do mentoring. I'm all about donations, but I also don't want to say that to this group where I know some of these small businesses that are listening cannot do that. So that's kind of my take on some of the equity. And also, a lot of those programs, only a percentage is actually getting to Black people. If you go down the rabbit hole in that, a lot of it's going to here, and then it's helping one kid or something like that. So pay attention to what you're donating and what your equity is as well. Hire Black talent, give them shares in your company. That goes a lot farther in ownership than it does to do some of these 20% donations and you're not growing your business. But that's my take from seeing some of behind the curtain of these businesses.
I think I would echo that last point about, if a give back is a certain percentage, is it more meaningful? Is that like a Band-Aid? Is it a great PR story? Or what if you took that percentage that you would use as a give back and actually use it to hire, to give people opportunity to look at the supply chain and like invest in growing your business and giving others the opportunity to learn, within your company with the hopes that, ideally, you want them to go off and be their best version of themselves, like if someone has that potential, they're going to end up putting in that work. So I guess there's always that question of, is the investment, does it make more sense to invest that back into opportunity within, minority owned brand, or should we just give the money to some other place that may or may not allocate it the way that we would have hoped? So I think that's the dilemma.
Yeah,
Yeah,
investing
I
in
think,
opportunity.
Oh, I was going to say, I don't think that like causes and commerce are mutually exclusive if you can sustain it. So if your givebacks do promote you, great. If you can like fit that inside like an authentic effort that is ongoing, it's a great thing. I'm a marketer and it for sure works on me. Like I literally spend more money because I think this is the type of brand that needs to exist versus, anything else. So if those things are working in tandem and it's orchestrated in a way that feels like they actually believe this, and I can see the skin in the game and I can see the continued effort, then I don't think that it's a bad thing. I definitely agree with Bianca. Like, don't do it at the detriment of your business. Got to think about the long game. So if there are other ways to give back, if there are in-kind ways to do that, if there are, I think oftentimes it's also like, there are like, lots of companies that are like working on the ground and in the field. And if it like fits with your brand for your give back to be like donating some of your resources, whether that's like intellectual or your time or whatever, to like get those folks and give them the spotlight and give them the time, give them your audience. Those can also be powerful ways of, giving back without going broke.
And it's a lot more, you're
Yeah.
active, right? You're an active participant.
Yeah.
And you're open next year as well.
Yeah.
There,
Yeah, I like
No.
that. Do it without going broke. There you go.
So we have our first Q&A, and I think it's an ask to talk a little bit more about what we've already touched on. And we'd love to hear some social justice informed marketing and brand story telling examples that the panelists feel have where folks have done well and executed authentically. Barbary was mentioned as one of those examples. Are there other folks you'd like to highlight?
I'm thinking cannabis. So this is a Droga5 ad and cost $1 million. So I don't want you to think this is one-to-one, but there's a company called Shine and they do meditation for people of color as their focus. And the ad was beautiful. Like I go back and watch that ad all the time because it reflected the kind of full spectrum of a community where there's certain neighborhoods that are going to look more urban. There's certain that are going to look like this. And it talked about kind of the stresses that we go through day to day and how there's this moment where they end it with, we know you because we are you type of thing. And it was this really authentic piece, but to me, it could have also been a cannabis commercial. Like it could have been in that same space because it was addressing that wellness. And so I love that ad. I highly recommend people look at that ad. I loved the recent one that Beats by Dre did, but I'm using examples that are super expensive, but I love those ads. So I'm in the industry, so I'm like trying to think of ones that were inexpensive efforts. I've seen some really good social media takeovers where they allowed Black poets and Black artists to take over their social media. And they're brands that I normally would have skipped over because I'm like, oh, I can't stand you advertising. And then when they had that, I'm stopping and I'm engaged with the poetry and I'm engaged. So I think there's also, I think art and cannabis has such a nice overlap that there's a lot you can do in the space that's authentic and inexpensive, that travels across multiple platforms. And then post things on Clubhouse. It's free, it's easy, it's you can have open discussions. That's another way to kind of amplify your brand.
Is the question about like what type of like advertisements we think have been really cool, or is it about just like more generally speaking, like what brands are showing up well from a kind of like equity standpoint? I only ask because
the question specifically asked social justice informed.
Go ahead.
Oh, It's social justice informed marketing and brand storytelling.
Okay. I mean, I think this one is it's a little bit maybe. Well, no, actually, I think it's probably relevant to a lot of the brands here. But I think that the way that Fenty sort of like kicked off was really good, because it was part of their strategy from the very beginning, and so they were thinking about inclusivity of like all sorts. And I think the first Fenty Savage fashion show, where you literally saw like every shape of person, every shade of person, every gender or question of person, like it was all there, and seeing that was really great. And I even there was an interaction, when I was talking about like, from like your packaging to your like products, it's like has to all be there. There was an interaction happening when the skincare line or something like that had launched, and somebody asked Brianna and said like, when does the men's come out or something like that? And she was like, it already did, and it was just like, that for me was just like, exactly, like the brand has like indoctrinated it so deeply into the DNA that it's just like now like in the air that they breathe. So I thought that was like really good storytelling, because it like literally goes across all of their touch points and everything that they do.
Those are such good answers. I think we should go to the next question.
You're the creative. You didn't have any.
I had a couple. I mean, like, I didn't really have any that were social justice specific, but I just think my answer was more around like innovation. Like, how do brands, even as they grow and scale, like how can they build investment into like innovation so that it's like socially conscious and aware, or just aware of like the world we're in and what's wrong with it, and how they can at least try to like reduce their footprint within it. So I just thought of examples of like, I think it's Parlay by Adidas, and the whole space hippie product line from Nike, where they literally take, ocean plastics and they take trash and make products with it, like that are pretty much like, I think the shoe is like 97% trash, like literally trash. And so just being aware of like how to like refurbish or reuse materials like within the process of creating new ones is probably somewhere that, cannabis can continue to further innovate and look into as well. It'd be cool if like, you found out your bong was trash. Would be kind of cool. It's like it didn't take like a whole new, set of plastic or glass or whatever materials, like didn't have to come from scratch. If there was a way to just like build that into the experience, I just feel like, things that are not only socially conscious, but also environmentally conscious. And I think environmental consciousness is probably another thing that I'm from New York too. I probably gladly threw a can of Coke out of a cab and laughed about it, just because it's like recycling and all that is not really an East Coast thing. And then coming out to the West Coast, there was like 30 different recycling bins for each thing. And I'm literally like standing there like confused, like not knowing where to put stuff. So like that was something that was a learning. So starting to like infuse those types of things into your experience as a consumer, then it just becomes a natural part of your life. So that's kind of where my head went with it.
I just thought of another one. Like there's a saying that I bring to a lot of the work that I do, which is representation is radical. And Etsy, I think this last holiday season, they did a few holiday spots, and they were just holiday spots, but the stories that they crafted were just like represented people with like different circumstances, different backgrounds, all these things. And I think that just because those storylines were what they were, it had like a really profound and deep impact. And I think sometimes that is the justice that people need and are looking for. And it again goes back to like the storytelling doesn't need to have like a painful element to it. It doesn't need to have something that is kind of like on the nose, like saying like this is about social justice. Sometimes the justice is just like let's reframe the story. You know, like let's tell a story about you know, a young girl who like just wants people to like pronounce her name properly, and so her mom bought her a chain, and like just tell a story about that part, and that's it. Like you don't have to like go too deeply into, you know, the kind of like histories and things that like lead up to that, and like all the ways that that makes her life like you know, tough or difficult. Sometimes like showing like the joy that she gets from the solution is like so powerful, and you know, on Black Twitter, like that's a lot of the conversation. It's like, we know, we get it. Nobody's got to tell us about like how much things suck. It's like, what now? What next? Like how else? Like what are the other ways? Like show us smiling, show us doing this, like show that, because that's the stuff that feels like that's when you're looking at like yeah, justice. Like that's it.
I think I totally agree, and Brandon had touched on earlier where it's just Black joy is like our Black joy is revolutionary too. We do not need like the constant pain to be the or apologies or that piece. I think Old Navy does this ad and it's super inclusive, and but every time that spot comes on, my kids run into the room and they're like staring at the TV and they love that ad, and because it's just Black joy. And so as a mom who's raising kids, to see Black joy sometimes is so beautiful for them. So we do not need constant reminder. Racism is not new to us. I think sometimes you want to market to Black people like racism was yesterday. We just figured we've lived our whole lives with this. So for us, this is something you're discovering. This is something you're uncomfortable with. We are really trying to kind of, as a consumer, marketing to us with sadness and angst and pain is not what we need. Like we know those parts in our life. The joy and triumph and winning to me is so much more beautiful in campaigns than when you're focusing on, like I said, trauma porn. I think the US has this weird obsession with trauma porn when it comes to Black lives. And to me, that apology of like, oh, we're so sorry. No, we need action and joy. We do not need that apology or your guilt. We do not need your guilt either. Like that you want to wash over us and hand us money. We want the joy. We want to be treated like a full multi-dimensional consumer. One of the cannabis friends, I have a friend who got this package in the mail, and he's a gamer. And it was cannabis company sent him the coolest gaming things. And basically it was note. It's like, you're someone we're a big fan of. And when they sent him this package, they were just like, we see what you do on the internet. We're a big fan of what you do. We put like, but they acknowledge that he's a whole person. They sent him gaming stuff because that's what he's into. That's what interests him. And to me, that was an authentic marketing effort. They just saw him on like Instagram, was like, dude, we like you, let us send you some gear. That to me feels more authentic than some of the efforts that you see from some of the brands who want to talk about pain and all the equity work they're doing.
Yeah, that's legit. Like if you count the amount of times that you see an ad that's like starring a Black person, a woman, you know, it's you'll see that it kind of focuses in on like what's that kind of like tension point, and like, you know, that's the tool in like storytelling oftentimes, like find the tension, build that up, resolve it. But oftentimes like that runs into that problem of like you're focusing probably on like some of the painful bits. That's how we like watch our drama, right? Like so many of our dramas are like tell a really compelling, like painful story of someone's struggles and triumphs. And that's how a lot of our like pop culture kind of exists. So we have to find a way to like break that. We have to find a way to like lean into places where it's just a story about a person doing this, and that person is a Black woman, and her past 5 years looks like this, and that's it. You know, like that's kind of it.
Cool. That's great. Thank y'all so much. We are at time, although I just could obviously just zone out and not zone out, just listen to y'all talk and enjoy that. I want to give a quick thank you to our sponsors who made this happen. Miller Nash, thank you for hosting us on Remo. And Barbary and Weed Maps, thanks for investing in this work for us and helping us put this panel together. Bianca, Brandon, Duchesne, thank you for donating your time and your talents, your energy. I want to give you a quick moment if you have anything you want to leave us with a take thing that you're working on that we should, if we want to check out more of your work, and or what's your favorite thing in the media right now? What are you digging into is bringing you joy? Bianca, you want to go first?
Oh, you made me go first. I will say I've written a couple pieces about DE&I that are like they're on my LinkedIn. Feel free to read them because I think they approach from a place and it expands upon kind of the stuff that we've mentioned. And outside of that, nothing. I want to give these two gentlemen time to share what they have going on.
Yeah, I'll go. Bianca mentioned some documentaries about cannabis. One is Grass is Greener. Grass is Greener on Netflix, and there's a segment that features our founder at Loud, Jesse Horton, and it's a really good watch. Gives you the history of the villainization of cannabis, and it's really amazing. And then media-wise, I've just been spending every waking hour on loud.com, LOWD, LOWD.com.
Get it in, my brother. I have been really into YouTube, actually. I think, the user-generated stuff on YouTube is just so great. I find myself doing that thing where I go down a rabbit hole. I look up one simple thing, like, how to repaint an exterior, like a door exterior. And then before I know it, I'm like looking into the suffragist movement or something I love that about YouTube. And I'm also been really into Clubhouse. There's something it's weird because you also can just talk to people, but I guess because social media went this way of we were talking through looking at people's texts, and now actually talking feels like this big kind of revelation or something that's really fresh. So I don't know, I'm really appreciating the conversations and the kind of spontaneity of Clubhouse. I don't have anything super great going on, but I do love having these types of conversations. I love talking shit, and I love when the talking shit goes gets real and then comes back to talking shit again. So if you want to holler at me on Instagram, I'm just at Shane Ramsey. Put up pretty great gifs, I think, and pictures of my kids. So,
For the kid content,
Oh yeah, let me plug my Instagram too.
Get it in, my brother.
Do it.
So it's at The Real Beedy, TheRealBeedy, and then we have at The Loud, TheLowd. I'll see y'all on Instagram.
Love it. Thanks. And we will, like I said, this was recorded, so you can go back and rewatch this conversation, watch me stumble through some questions while some really informed people have smart conversations. And we'll also give you links to theloud.com and to everyone's Instagram, those important DA articles that Bianca wrote. And who knows what else. So if you registered, I have your email. You're going to get an email from me. Again, thank you all so much for donating your time and energy to be here.